There is something about 1969 that seems almost impossible when you look at it from today. Not the moon landing, not Woodstock, something more ordinary, but perhaps more remarkable. A worker earning minimum wage could realistically save for and purchase a home. If someone lived through it, they know this was not unusual. It was simply how things worked. This was a time when the American dream was not a slogan. It was a financial reality. The federal minimum wage was $1.60 an hour. A median home cost around $25,000. A single income could support a family, pay a mortgage, and still have money left over. Young couples in their 20s were buying houses. Factory workers owned property. The math simply worked in ways that seem like fiction today. This was the decade that gave us unprecedented middle-class expansion, affordable housing, strong unions, and an economy where hard work translated directly into homeownership. The gap between wages and housing prices had not yet become the chasm it is today. Let's walk through what the economics actually looked like and why a minimum wage worker in 1969 could achieve what seems impossible now. Some of this might surprise you. Some of it might explain how we got from there to here. Let's step into that world. The federal minimum wage in 1969 was $1.60 an hour. That sounds almost comically low until you understand what that money could actually buy. Working 40 hours a week for 50 weeks meant an annual income of about $3,200. That was real money in 1969. The median home price in America was approximately $25,000. This means a home costs roughly 7 to 8 times a minimum wage worker's annual salary. That ratio matters enormously. Today, the median home price exceeds $400,000, while the federal minimum wage remains $7.25 an hour. A minimum wage worker today earns about $15,000 annually. The median home now costs nearly 27 times that income. The math has fundamentally broken. In 1969, a minimum wage worker saving diligently could accumulate a down payment in 2 to 3 years. Banks would approve mortgages for buyers spending 25 to 28% of their income on housing. The numbers worked. A $20,000 mortgage at 7% interest meant monthly payments of around $130. That was achievable on minimum wage and comfortable on an average factory salary. Average workers earned more than minimum wage, of course. The median household income in 1969 was around $9,400. For these families, a $25,000 home cost less than 3 times their annual earnings. This ratio of home price to income is what economists call affordable. Anything above 3 times income starts becoming a stretch. Today, median households face home prices 6 to 8 times their annual earnings in many markets, and far higher in major cities. Mortgage terms in 1969 were different from today in important ways. Down payments of 20% were standard, meaning buyers needed to save $5,000 for a median home. That sounds like a lot until you realize that rent was also proportionally lower. A decent apartment might cost $100 to $150 per month. A family could pay rent, cover expenses, and still save several $100s each month toward a down payment. Interest rates were higher than the historic lows of recent decades, typically between 7 and 8% for a 30-year fixed mortgage. But lower principal amounts meant lower total payments despite the higher rates. The monthly payment on a $20,000 mortgage was manageable in ways that a $350,000 mortgage simply is not, regardless of interest rate. Before we continue with what daily life looked like for these home buying workers, if you are enjoying this look at how economics shaped American life and want to explore more decades and stories about how we got here, consider subscribing. There is so much more history that explains the present. The late 1960s economy was remarkably different from today's. Manufacturing jobs paid well and were plentiful. A high school graduate could walk into a factory, start working, and earn enough to support a family within a few years. These jobs offered benefits, pensions, and job security. The idea of working for one company for 30 years and retiring with a pension was normal, not a nostalgic fantasy. Unions were strong in 1969. About 28% of American workers belonged to unions, compared to roughly 10% today. Union contracts meant regular raises, health insurance, and protections against arbitrary firing. A unionized factory worker could earn significantly more than minimum wage and expect those wages to rise with inflation. The single-income household was still common. Roughly 60% of married women did not work outside the home. This was not because families were wealthy. It was because one income genuinely covered expenses. A factory worker's salary paid the mortgage, bought groceries, covered utilities, and left enough for modest savings and occasional treats. The family car might be bought used. Vacations might mean driving to visit relatives. But the basics were covered without financial anxiety. Housing itself was different in 1969. Homes were smaller. The average new home was around 1,500 square feet compared to over 2,500 square feet today. Houses had one bathroom, maybe two. Garages held one car. Bedrooms were modest. The idea of a master suite with a walk-in closet and attached bathroom was a luxury, not an expectation. Building materials and methods were simpler. Homes lacked the insulation, wiring complexity, and amenities that modern building codes require. Central air conditioning was not standard in most of the country. Dishwashers were still considered somewhat luxurious. These simpler homes cost less to build, which kept prices lower. Land was abundant near cities. Suburban development was still expanding outward into former farmland. Developers could buy land cheaply and build affordable tract housing. The constraints that limit housing construction today, zoning restrictions, environmental reviews, and neighborhood opposition, were far less significant in 1969. Property taxes were lower relative to home values. A $25,000 home might have annual property taxes of $300 to $500. Combined with lower insurance costs, the total cost of ownership remained manageable for working-class families. The cost of everything else was proportionally lower too. A gallon of gas cost about 35 cents. A loaf of bread was around 23 cents. A dozen eggs cost 62 cents. A new car might cost $3,500. College tuition at a state university was a few $100s per year. The minimum wage workers $1.60 an hour bought more of everything. Healthcare costs had not yet exploded. A hospital stay cost a fraction of today's prices. Health insurance, when people had it through employers, covered most expenses. The anxiety of medical bankruptcy that haunts modern Americans was far less prevalent. Credit card debt barely existed. The first universal credit cards had only recently become widespread. Most families operated on cash and savings. The buy now, pay later culture had not yet taken hold. If you could not afford something, you saved until you could. This enforced discipline also meant less debt dragging down household finances. Young people in 1969 expected to do better than their parents. This was not optimism. It was the lived experience of their parents' generation, which had seen incomes rise steadily throughout the 1950s and the 1960s. Each generation seemed to live a little better than the last. Home ownership was a normal milestone, not a distant aspiration. What changed between 1969 and today represents one of the most significant economic shifts in American history. Housing prices began outpacing wages in the 1970s, and they never stopped. The ratio of home prices to income that made buying possible in 1969 steadily worsened, decade after decade. Manufacturing jobs that paid living wages moved overseas. The service economy that replaced them offered lower wages and fewer benefits. Union membership declined as industries changed and laws weakened labor protections. The single-income household became the dual-income household out of necessity, not choice. Housing construction failed to keep pace with population growth, particularly in desirable areas. Zoning restrictions, building regulations, and neighborhood opposition limited new construction. Simple economics of supply and demand pushed prices higher. Financial deregulation changed mortgage markets. Creative lending practices allowed people to borrow more than they could afford, and that pushed prices higher still. The 2008 financial crisis showed where that led. Meanwhile, minimum wage stagnated. Adjusted for inflation, the minimum wage in 1969 of $1.60 would be over $13 today. The federal minimum wage remained at $7.25, last raised in 2009. Even state minimum wages that exceed the federal floor have not kept pace with housing costs in most markets. The math that worked in 1969 stopped working. A minimum wage job that once could buy a house now cannot cover rent in most American cities. The path from hard work to homeownership that seemed guaranteed to previous generations has become uncertain or impossible for many. What defined 1969 economically was alignment. Wages aligned with housing costs, expenses aligned with incomes, expectations aligned with reality. A worker could see a clear path from where they were to where they wanted to be. That clarity has been lost. The numbers tell the story clearly. Home prices have risen over 1,500% since 1969. Minimum wage has risen about 350%. That growing gap represents the fundamental change in American economic life. What was normal became exceptional. What was expected became aspirational. For those who bought homes in 1969, many still live in them or sold them for prices that would have seemed impossible back then. A house purchased for $25,000 is now worth $300,000 or more. That wealth accumulation was the foundation of middle-class security. New generations trying to enter the housing market face a fundamentally different calculation. The 1969 economy was not perfect. Discrimination limited opportunities for many Americans. Environmental regulations barely existed, and job safety was often neglected. But the basic equation of working hard, saving money, and buying a house functioned in ways it no longer does. For those who remember when minimum wage could buy a house or whose parents built lives on that foundation, there is always more history to explore.